He's the #1 player in the world. He's been that for over a decade. So if anyone has the compass, even when it seems like they're blindfolded and on their own, it's Magnus. So I feel like for Fedoseev, he showed yesterday that he can storm back from a deficit. But what he did against Alireza Firouzja is he went all out. He put his queen off the side of the board, stole a pawn, was greedy. I'm not sure it's going to work 2 days in a row. So Fedoseev, he starts with a pretty quiet opening. We'll see if he's willing to throw his pawns forward, just like we saw, for example, Anish Giri do at the end of Tata Steel. Sometimes you have to throw all your pieces forward, everything but the kitchen sink, and go for the attack, David.
Yeah, I fully agree. And he would love to do that. I've seen Fedoseev do that plenty of times with a lot of success, but against different type of opposition, of course. It's easy to say against someone that he would outright throw your pawns forward, attack, go for it. And it's another whole mindset to do it against Magnus. So right now, it's a Queen's Gambit declined. It's the Carlsbad pawn structure we've been talking about with pawns on e3, d4 against pawns on c6, d5. But Magnus loves these types of pawn structures. Now he's aiming to trade off these bishops, and the fewer pieces on the board, the better Magnus becomes, remember. So I love this decision. I was about to say, keep those bits on, keep those bishops, just in case you need them for a later attack. Magnus doesn't look too happy. What do you make of the body language and the start of this game, Tanya?
The way he won the first game, I think he's got all the reasons to be happy right now. It's hard to say how he's feeling, but I think he's very pleased with the quality of play from that game one. He jumps in with the knight to the center of the board. And for white, I was just about to say, needs to take a decision. Fedoseev, does he put the knight on f3 or the other plan that we see with the knight moving in front of the king to e2? Instead, Fedoseev chooses the approach where eventually the knight can jump further on, the knight can land onto e5. We might even see him try to build chances with shock castle, the f-pawn moving forward, f4, f5 in certain positions. But having white, he needs to make sure that he does create as much of a possibility to get a game out of this one as much as he can, because it only gets harder on from here.
Well, with the white pieces, he has 2 whites in these final 3 games, does Fedoseev. As you're saying, Tanya, he needs to make the most of it. And I like his position. Optically, it's pleasing. You have all 4 of your minor pieces out on the 3rd rank. You control key squares, and namely the f5 square. Like, black can't easily jump forward in this position. And so the next moves aren't obvious for how black should develop. Your bishop on c8, it's tucked at home. You may want to go all the way out to g4, but that walks into Tanya's plan with knight to e5. So, David, as we look at this position, you know Magnus very well. He might have to settle for a cramped structure. Do you think that he's quite displeased with what he's achieved out of the opening?
I think Magnus is happy with the pawn structure he's got. He's happy with the skeleton of the position. But as you say, Robert, there's no natural plans. And Magnus, he's probably better than anyone at just putting his pieces on good squares, finding nice homes for them. Here it's tricky, even for the likes of Magnus. And like you say, awkward squares. So he's in 2 minds. He's happy that he's got a solid foundation, but awkward squares for his pieces, like this e6 point. We never like to see bishops kind of staring at their own pawns. They look like big pawns in this type of position. And yeah, it's just about how Magnus is able to maneuver. Maybe after pushing the a pawn, he'll bring his knight out via a6. Maybe he'll bring the knight back round to sit by his king. He's rock solid, and he's a point up in the match, so he has something to play with. It's just about whether Fedoseev can attack. And on the flip side, I don't really see exactly what white should be doing. Often here, we talk about minority attacks, throwing 2 pawns forward to undermine these 3 on the queen side, but that is less attractive with the black knight sitting in the center, nicely poised to jump into any holes later on. And here we go. Fedoseev, he's maneuvering. This is exciting. This is instructive as well, going towards this black king. He's just edging towards the king side. He's going to try and put some pressure on this black bishop, first of all, but watch out for some nasty checks, just in case if you keep, if you forget to keep your king safe later. So, yeah, I could go on about these pawn structures forever. I'll stop now. But I think that Magnus isn't as comfortable as he would like to be, Tanya.
I agree with you. And I think for Magnus, it's also going to be key to try and get a central break of c5 in at the right moment. Because if white is given a free hand, we can see that attack brewing up on the king side. Knight f4, knight e5. You might eventually jump with the knight to h5. The f-pawn moving forward. So for Magnus, once he's already lined up the queen with the bishop, also hinting at c5, knight can come to d7 or a6 and defend that. I was expecting Fedoseev to land on the e5 square with his knight, but we see a different plan here. Bishop to e5. Robert, does this surprise you?
It does, and I think that Magnus suddenly has fixed all of his problems because his latest move, bring his queen to c8, may look unusual, but he's lining his queen and bishop up. So bishop to f5, trade pieces when you have less space. And in this position, black is feeling a bit cramped. You haven't fully developed. So trading pieces should be favorable for Magnus Carlsen. And as soon as I say it, he plays it. I think that he has neutralized the opening advantage from the white side, but the game continues because there isn't complete clarity. As David pointed out, white's knights are heading towards the black king. It can be a bit scary if you are not accurate, but now that the development is complete, I do think Magnus, he has everything under control, and it's a timely sip of water or whatever's in that bottle there because he's feeling good about his position, Tanya.
Yeah, I think, David, you were asking about Magnus's body language. I think this has got to be a lot more relaxed for him now that one set of minor pieces are off the board. He's managed to get rid of, well, what is considered one of the big problem pieces in these kind of pawn structure, the light squared bishop. You really want to trade that off, and he's done it, which solves a lot of problems. But still, white feels like setting up for that minority attack you had mentioned earlier. The rook now lined up with the queen, b4, a4, b5 in the air. How does black continue to improve and fight these ideas, David?
Well, Magnus knows better than me, but he has a few options. I just wanted to say completely on your point, Tanya, the pawns control light squares now, the bishop will control dark squares later, so great strategy. And also a note for everyone at home, if you're cramped, if you're struggling for space, if your pieces are suffocating, just trade off one set of minor pieces, knights and bishops, and you live, you kind of breathe easier. And yeah, I was going to say, actually on the last move, Magnus could have gone for a double attack. I was slightly surprised the black knight didn't jump in to hit this pawn, first of all, which has just moved. It was sitting on b2, but also the black knight from c4 would have hit this bishop in the center. So Magnus, he could have actually forced the issue, traded more pieces off, and felt probably safer. But now what he would love to do is somehow get either the queens off or maybe one set of knights off. He'd love to trade off white bishop sitting pretty in the center. Ultimately, though, there we go. I was going to say, just before that, Magnus's trademark move is to push rook's pawns, flank pawns. Reinvigorated by AlphaZero in 2019, Magnus had one of his best years, and he loves kind of gaining space on the flanks. Watch out now for this backward pawn to be an issue later. The black rook could slide across. So Magnus has got a bunch of ideas. In the meantime, I don't really see what Fedoseev should be doing right now. Ultimately, this pawn structure is something Magnus is known for, and Fedoseev, I thought his opening was a success, but one or two moves later, the departure of those bishops, and suddenly it's just a position, as we say. It's just roughly level. And I do fear for his chances. So, okay, this is one to check in on a bit later. Maybe let's zoom out and go to the bird's eye view to check in on the other game, the clash of the underdogs after those mutual blunders a bit earlier. Who will recover best? And Robert, we see it on the left-hand side there. First glance, who do you favor?
Ooh, we got that Benoni structure on the left-hand side of our screen, and Jose Martinez just hops in with his knight. I have to say that his position looks very solid from the black side. Denis Lazovic, it's not like he's done anything wrong himself. He's pushing pawns into center, but I think that there are chances for black to strike, and that is the standard for this opening. So as we dive in to the X's and O's, I just also want to note that the situation seems perfectly acceptable for both players, but I'm looking at strikes over on the queen side for black with a move like pawn to b5. That's one of Jose's main ideas. And for Denis, he's expanded his center. Can he push f4 next to boot that queen out of there? Tanya, these are not easy decisions, but you're a d4 player, so you must have experience in this structure.
You're right, Robert. And in these positions, it's so important for white to keep as many minor pieces as possible because white does have the space advantage. You were talking about the break on the queen side, a very thematic b5 idea. But Jose Martinez goes for another thematic idea, which is to try to get play on the king side. He pushes the g pawn forward. You have to watch out for this g-pawn from g5, going one step ahead to g4, really cramping down on the king side, gaining more space, isolating that e4 pawn, making sure that the f-pawn remains a backward pawn on f2. I really like this aggressive play by Jose, and it really puts Denis into the think right now. Two sets of minor pieces off the board. In these structures, it does favor black, David.
Yeah, and exactly. This Benoni is all about trading one set of pieces, so you're not struggling for space, as we mentioned in the other game. And talking of fighting for space, he's been stopped on the king side. He's now throwing pawns forward on the queen side. I was going to say black's pawn move, pawn to g5, it's the sweet spot. It's active and it's strategic. It's kind of playing dynamically, but also stopping White's main plan of pushing a pawn to f4 for good. But now it's all about the other side of the board, and how does Denis react there? A bit of a positional threat to capture on c5 due to the fact that Black's pinned on the b file, this rook undefended on the back rank. Ideally, you would love to move this bishop out the way, therefore. Always connect your rooks if you can. But White's queen also peering down at this pawn. A bit awkward, I've got to say. I think Denis has chosen the right moment to strike, so I love what Jospem, I keep saying Jospem instead of Jose, but what he's been doing so far, but still questions to answer. And he trades off, and this is a high responsibility decision because now he's left with a backward pawn forever. And he has to back this up with active piece play. The idea, I guess, Robert, is to activate his pieces to better outposts.
Taking control of some key dark squares, why not? And I think a critical point is that this a5 move, it challenges the white rook and says, where are you going? So look at Denis, he backs it up, and so quickly does Jose play knight to d7. Look at how he's played. g5 to stop White's f4 pawn push, then playing on the queen side. So Jose understands the structure, he understands where his pieces belong, and White's pieces look pretty optimally placed. But that's not good enough. You need to come up with plans rather than just say, hey, this is a good aesthetic, I'm feeling nice. What is the next plan for White? I'm still looking at a way to try and push the pawn to f4, but it does open up both kings. It's not going to be a one-sided attack. Both players need to watch out at this stage, Tanya.
You're absolutely right about that. And I think there are two plans in these positions, Robert, for White. You either try to push f4, which is a double-edged sword because you open the G line for both. You could do that with either shifting your rook from d1 to f1 to support the advance, or perhaps the queen could fall back to d2 or e3. The main idea is to defend this f4 square, try and push Black queen back, and then expand in the center. The other idea that I see for White is maybe another shift, a more strategic plan to try to double up on the D line, making sure that Black's knight on d7 stays as a defensive piece. I see that Denis has gone for queen to e3. He wants to get f4 in, and he does it. This is blowing up, this is opening up, and it's not a one-sided attack, as you pointed out, because the G file opens for both players. We're perhaps going to see a trade on f4, and then the queen falls back, the king will shift to h8, and who lands on the G line first?
Yeah, it's just a race now. It's going to be mutual attacks. I was looking at the queen side for the last few moves, Tanya, and then suddenly attention switches elsewhere for both players. And I just want to talk as well, as this one really starts to heat up, about that previous game. Surely if you're Jose Martinez, you get frustrated. Denis Lazovic just never loses. And now he's the one on the attack. He's the one pushing. Do you think Jose is happy with the outcome here? Especially as his position is kind of hanging by a thread. E5 now in the air. It's lurking. What's going through his mind, Robert?
That he's probably a bit scared. E5 is a tremendous threat. It hits the queen on f6, but it also tries to spring free some passed pawns in the center. And Black's pieces are pretty well placed. The rook on b8, it protects the pawn in front of it. The rook on e8, it tries to counter White's ideas in the center. The queen on f6, the knight on c5, they're very clearly on active squares. So now it was the bishop's turn. So he plays bishop d7. He kind of had to, not that it was the only good move, but Tanya, as I look at this, White is playing e5 whether you like it or not, so at least create a counter threat, and that pawn on a4, that one is in the line of fire from Black's pieces now.
This is really heating up. E5 on the board. Black is going for the queen side with the pawn weaknesses. White now steps away with the king. It looks like it's going to be White's rook that's going to be arriving first on the G line. Black has to take a moment out. I don't believe you can capture on A4 right now. Rook G1 just looks far too menacing. Denis the Menace, you give him rook G1. That's going to be trouble. It might be time for Jose to step aside with his own king to H8 to try to dodge all these ideas along the G file.
Say king h8, Tanya, and I agree, it might well be the best move, but I don't see it with confidence because it's also sitting on an open diagonal potentially. And I wonder whether in the near future he's going to try and drop his queen on the d3 square just at any cost. It might come at the cost of a pawn. And it's just more important to survive with your king. Get those queens off at any cost. That would be the other main move on my radar, at least right now, for Martinez. 3 minutes on the clock. If you're getting attacked, you have to maintain some time. And there we go, queen to d3. I think a good practical decision. Evaluation bar says no, of course. But at least now with queens off, he will live to fight another day. And as we saw in the previous game, when the clock ticks down, he's really strong in that latter phase. So a decision to survive, Robert.
But I think I understand why this gets a question mark. Just like Jose exploited a game ago, I think the fact that the queen is loose on d3 allows white to play knight to e4 now, and you can't touch that knight on e4. Oh, he missed it. But knight e4 was untouchable, and that knight would have landed on f6 with a check against the king, the rook, and the bishop all at once. So that skirmish, that those tactical sequences there were favorable for Denis, but we know it's in his style to play the positional choice if he can. So I think that his position isn't bad in the live board underneath me here, but this would have been aggressive and playing for a bit more. It comes with risk, that's for sure. Loose pawns everywhere, but it also would have been playing with strength, with the initiative. So I think, Tanya, at this stage, we just saw the queens come off the board. A mistake was made, but it was overlooked. So really, was it a mistake at all?
To me, the big question is, can't black just now pick up the a4 pawn? I see that the d6 pawn might be hanging after you give a check on g3, but at the end of it, once you give a check, black side steps, the rook on d1 is hanging as well. So you can't immediately capture d6. You probably have to trade the bishop for the knight first. It just feels like the a-pawn can be really dangerous here. For Jose Martinez, it might be the moment to start looking for chances, because even if white eventually captures on d6, that white pawn on d6, David, will be a weakness. Maybe we can just show it. Knight takes bishop, knight takes knight, rook to g3 check, king moves. This time, I think f8 would be the square of choice. And then you grab on d6. Firstly, d6 is a weak pawn, but also look at that a5 pawn. It's a protected passed pawn, a good knight on a4. This endgame could be very dangerous for white, David.
Definitely. White's bishop is not playing a role, and I think the most important point, as you called it, Tanya, this is not a real strength. Maybe the stronger pawn is the one behind it, tying down a black rook once it takes the runner, the front d pawn. But yeah, essentially it's all about black's queenside majority, and I actually think black has a pretty clear path to victory in this game, white with no counterplay at all. So difficult decision here for Denis Lazovic. Let's go back. I don't think he should get greedy. Instead, he plays the move rook to g1, and he's going for the black king somehow. But how? Wow, pawn to e6, trying to deflect away this black knight. The black knight is forced to defend its bishop, so you cannot take too many times on this e6 square. And now he's aiming just for a pawn storm. Pawn to e6, followed by pawn to f5, f forward here. And at least he's mixing it up. I think a really clever decision there from Denis, Robert.
I watched Jose shake his head. He overlooked this move e6. I'm shaking my head too, because it's a pawn race. This e-pawn accompanied by an f-pawn, that looks scary. But as Tanya mentioned, there's an a and a b pawn for black, and those pawns can rumble forward too. So I'm worried about the black king. I'm worried about all of these passed pawns. And I'm also worried about Jose's clock. Tanya, we keep talking about how he's doing well on, even in time scrambles. This is very tactical. So you are going to have to be extra careful here to survive this position against Denis Lazovic.
Couldn't agree more with that, but we've seen Jose just how accurate he is with little time on the clock, even if the position's really complicated. And although white's the one who's down a pawn, and yes, we pointed out that a passer, but this last move by Denis, that's terrifying. White's got a protected passed pawn on e6 now, and our computer is showing the best move, the knight rerouting itself to d4 via e2, attacking that f5 weakness. I'm picking white right now, despite Jose being the one who's pawn up. I think black's got to be the one who has to be careful in this position. But David, he chooses another plan. He wants to put this bishop on h5.
Love it. The bishop's coming in. It might just come in anyway. Bishop to h5, plonk it down on f7, and there's going to be all sorts of checkmating ideas around the black king. The all-seeing overlords, the silicon overlords there, the computers say knight to e2 first, even stronger. And again, same plan, knight back. And once it lands on e2, comes forward into d4, beautiful outpost, and this is the big weakness in black's position, the f5 pawn. I think Jose needed to bite the bullet and just trade off pawns earlier, because this one, yes, he's blocked up white for a move or two, but it's going to fall in the long term. Instead, Denis puts his bishop on h5, very natural move. And again, the blue arrow indicates black's best move by far. You need to trade off one set of rooks, but I'm going to say that's not obvious. It's not instinctive. You normally would want to keep a rook behind passed pawns, throw this pawn down the board. It's simply to stop white's checkmating ideas. If you allow this bishop to land on f7 and the white rook to slide over to g3, then black will be doomed. So you need to trade before it's too late. Rook to g8. Only way to save this game. He's got 30 seconds left, though. Oh, Jose, I don't envy his chances, Robert.
No, and you could see it on his face. And look, he was Bishop E8, the evaluation, it goes all the way up. And I think it's because white can bring the knight in, and there Denis goes. Knight D4, hitting F5, going to C6. With checkmating threats, the loose pawns in black's position, I just feel like they're going to drop off. A rook goes to G5 as well if you want to win F5 directly. This looks painful as the white's pawns feel faster than black's, Tanya. David, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, Denis, he's got this under control.
He's
got race. And you're ahead. You've got a head start. Pawn on E6, Tanya.
And Robert, this is something you've always said. It's not about the quantity of pawns. It's about the quality of pawns. And that pawn on E6 is worth more than just the one pawn deficit that white has right now. Look at the piece activity. Denis also up on the clock. Jose shaking his head. He's down to 30 seconds. The F5 pawn is falling. The knight is coming in. The A pawn hasn't really gone down the board. That move E6, Robert, I think that was the moment that it changed the game. It changed the dynamics, and it took Jose by big surprise.
The key word is dynamic. It changed the game from one where both players were pushing pawns, trying to gain the upper hand, and then made it dynamic. And look at this position as David draws the arrows. David, you take it away. This is such a nice find from Denis to secure victory, it seems.
He's calculated so deeply, he's going to throw his knight out the way with a check now, a fork, clearing the path for the coronation of his e-pawn. He's going to make a queen. This is game over. Beautiful there from Denis Lazovic. He spotted it all a mile away. This is just wonderful play. Queen coming. Jose Martinez is going to resign. And there we go. Denis gets the win. Beautiful play.
Wow.
I think we're all so impressed right now.
Just incredible precision by Denis Lazovic, starting from that move E6. Amazing conversion and spectacular end with that move Knight G6. You cannot stop the pawn from queening, and Denis Lazovic takes the first win of this match, which means that for Jose, he needs to win a game to level the score. And meanwhile, Fedoseev is about to bounce back in his match against Magnus, Robert.
Oh, a long time ago, in a position far away, it looked like Magnus had everything under control. But look at the evaluation bar, but also the last couple moves. It is 2 extra pawns for Fedoseev, but maybe Magnus could use one of his pawns as a distraction and try to grab a couple of his own. A reminder to all of our newer audience members out there, if white just has a knight and a king against an enemy king, there is no way to checkmate. So that's what black is aiming for. Get rid of all of white's pawns, even if it costs you a knight, and that's what Fedoseev will avoid. So David, do you see any chances? You know how to grind like a grandmaster. Can Magnus try anything?
He can, and he is trying everything possible to draw this game, to give up the black knight, give up the black pawns for all of white's remaining foot soldiers there. But computer's indicating actually only one winning move. Fedoseev doesn't find it. He had to give a knight check first, and actually maybe needed to keep more pawns alive, because suddenly Magnus, as you said, is going to use the g-pawn as a distraction, and then the black king is just going to eat up white's remaining pawns. The black king is going to come in, and some easy targets. Now that's... I've jinxed him. Commentator's curse. Why is that a mistake? And he's got away with it. He's going to come in now. Fedoseev actually could have given a check. We'll show this later. That was a beautiful idea to maintain a winning position, Robert.
And you only see that because the evaluation bar is off to the side. Nobody is looking for it. David will show it after the game, but now we see the result should not be in too much doubt. You go after the white pawns, and that was another great move, by the way. King B5, that eliminates any questions instead of trying to bring your king away from that passed pawn.
I think you guys spotted it, maybe with the evaluation bar, but I think Magnus spotted it. We saw him react right now. I think he knows that there was that moment that Fedoseev missed the win, and now it's everything under control for Magnus. He survives it. He doesn't only have the incredible ability to win winning positions, but he also has the ability to survive lost positions, and Magnus Carlsen does it again, saves the game, and it ends.